Return to open session. Is there a second?
Second.
Ask for a roll call vote. Mrs. Polish?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
And I vote yes, so we're back in open session. I'm going to report out. In executive session, we received advice regarding the administrative contract, custodian, superintendent goals evaluations, Newport Special Education, and Council 94. No votes were taken. Executive session will continue after open session. I'm going to ask for a motion to seal the minutes.
Second.
Ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So we are returned to open session. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, welcome to our December 13th, 2022 Tiverton School Committee meeting. That's so everybody knows where they are and who they are. Anyone signed up for open forum? Okay. So I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Dr. Larkin, may I ask to remove the minutes from our last meeting from the consent agenda for discussion?
Yes. So any objection to removing item of the approval of the consent, approval of the 11/29/22 minutes? So I'll ask for a motion to approve the remainder of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes,
Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Mrs. Farnworth?
thank you. I do have a couple of corrections that I would like to enter in on the agenda, on the minutes from our last meeting. Under letter D, election of board committees, that is actually an appointments process. We didn't hold an election. It was basically a call for volunteers, if you recall.
Okay.
So if that could be changed. And also, there was no mention of our discussion or lack of appointments to the finance subcommittee, and I felt because we had conversation
Should be
around it,
noted.
that it should be included.
Okay.
Also, just mention as a normal hygiene point that if there is no actions or correspondence or open forum items, that they should be indicated as such, that there were none.
Okay. I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda minutes with the notations that the designation of liaisons and subcommittee members were appointments, that there was no action taken on appointing members to the finance subcommittee, and what was the other thing?
Wherever there were no actions or items, that be indicated within the
Wasn't there
minutes.
something else, though?
That was it.
The appointment versus the elected.
Yeah, appointed versus elected, and that
Yes.
no action was taken on appointments to the finance subcommittee. I thought there was something else you wanted changed. Be that as it may, I'll ask for a motion to that effect.
I'll make that motion.
A second.
Any discussion? I'll ask for a vote. Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
And Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
All right. Gotten through 1 through 7 in less than 10 minutes. All right. Next is item 8, policy development, revision, and review. Discussion, possible vote. We have 4 different policies, 1073, 1075, 1187, and 1188. I'll take each of these separately. I'll ask for a motion to approve policy number 1073.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? So because I just have the numbers, I'll have to remember what each policy was.
Yeah, Dr. Larkin, if I could suggest that in the
Yep.
future, we have the actual name on all the policies, including, in addition to the
Yeah,
numbers.
agreed.
That would
So
be-
this was the web page policy for
Okay.
those watching at home. If you haven't fallen asleep yet. So any discussion? Okay, I'm going to ask for a vote. Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. Next is policy number 1075, and that is electronic communications policy. I'll ask for a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, I'll ask for a vote. Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. Next is our policy number 1187, suicide prevention policy. I'll ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
And I vote yes. And last is policy number 1188, suicide prevention protocol, Tiverton's, Tiverton. I'll ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
And any discussion? So I'll ask for a vote. Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
And Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So that is our 4 policies. So now, we're up to new business, 9A, something much less dry. Introduction of our new communications director, Dr. Sanchioni.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a pleasure to introduce you tonight. A person who comes to us with a wealth of experience working in the communications field, truly an expert, and Tiverton is going to benefit greatly from her past experience and her passion for that type of position. I'd like to bring up Ms. Destiny Vitale. Destiny most recently is working for the Newport Mansions doing all their PR. Prior to that, she worked for Moses Brown doing the PR there. She, again, a wealth of experience. Her reputation and her reference checks were impeccable. So it's a pleasure to introduce you, Destiny. Please say hello to the community and to the committee.
So welcome to Tiverton.
Destiny, push.
Yeah, you might want to push the button.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. This is week 2, and so I've been familiarizing myself with some amazing educational experiences. I spent some time at the Z Labs in the middle school and the high school. Today I've garnered a bunch of video, talked to some students, and I am really ready to promote Tiverton School District. There's some amazing things going on here, and I can't wait for everyone to see it.
Okay, well, welcome to Tiverton. We're looking forward to working with you and hearing a lot of great things.
Thank you. Thank
Right.
you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is item 9B, discuss and possible vote Newport County Regional Special Education Program contract. Dr. Sanchioni.
Mr. Chairman, it's limiting right now possible vote, because I know there's a lot of members of our staff who are watching this meeting here today. I know there's a lot of information that he's going to need to move forward on this, but just to discuss the possibility of leaving the Newport region. We've done some analysis. The genesis of this came from, as you recall, Middletown and Newport were thinking of merging, and they had a vote on the ballot in October, and when we heard that, we knew that if that happened, the region would go away. And so,
Can you just pull your mic a little closer?
Yeah, I think you need to.
No, I think it's working, it just needs to be closer.
that better?
Yeah.
It is,
All right.
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Dakotas. And so when we thought that potentially the region would dissolve because of a merger in Tiverton here, we started doing an analysis. We wanted to make sure we were best prepared in case that was going away. And our analysis kind of led us to the conclusion that educating our students is always number one priority, and we want to make sure we have the top-of-the-flight programs to do that. And we look at, I know some of our students go over to Middletown, a lot of transportation there, transportation costs with that. Could we replicate the few programs that are in Middletown here in Tiverton at a cost-neutral amount, but also provide greater oversight with our own administration, greater care from staff who know that they're working here in Tiverton and so forth. So we just continue to delve into that. We still have a lot of work to do. The financial analysis that we have at this point is not, still needs some refinement to it. There's a lot of questions that have to be asked. But again, I just want to make sure the committee is aware that our guiding light is always what's in the best interest of our kids. And we're looking at every student who needs these services, where they can be best provided for. And we're coming to the conclusion that possibly we can do that here in Tiverton. Fortunate to have the director of the Newport Special Education Region with us tonight, Ms. Sarah Krager. We've been conversing with her. We've conversed with the other two districts who are involved in this, would be Middletown and Little Compton. They also are looking at it from their standpoints. I think they're also looking at this as, this was once a very favorable organization for all the districts involved, but at this point it may have used its useful life, and that everyone may benefit from dissolving. But again, that information has to still be called out to a greater level. But the communication and the discussion really should start happening now. So I'll pause there. I know Sarah's here to answer any of your questions, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, Sarah, if you want to come up and give us your 2 cents. A little bit cold, sorry.
Yeah, I actually think Peter described that pretty well on how all of this came to be. And when we did just a general and actually kind of quick analysis of the number of students and needs, it became pretty clear that with the number of students that we have going to Middletown, we could actually create the programs in Tiverton a little bit creatively and a little bit outside the box, but that's what we do. And we can service the students here in Tiverton and not having to bus them over to Middletown. Similarly, with the other districts, it's looking like that too. Like Peter mentioned, when the region started and for much of its longevity, it made a whole lot of sense for students, and it made a whole lot of sense to share services. But the districts have really become their own personality. Things were different, and they shared transportation contracts. Their calendars were the same. A lot of that is changing, and they all, like I said, are even professional development is very different. So I think there's opportunities. So first and foremost, we can service our kids, and we can service them in Tiverton. And I have no doubt that those services that we've been doing will remain quality as they have been. And then in addition to that, I think if you do have your own administrator here, not just overseeing special education, but you have someone who can also oversee additional initiatives and programs in the district as well, instead of having other folks do those. So we're a little bit in the beginning, but we have done a deep enough dive to really further explore this.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Waiting for connection.
I'm always waiting for a connection of some sort. So there's not a motion. I'm going to open up the floor to questions on the part of the committee. Mr. Dakotas? We are the school committee.
That's right. From curiosity, what would Middletown be doing? How will they be attacking this going forward? Would it be the same as what we're doing? Are they going to go in a different direction?
We're still in conversations there. I think they were open to several different options. I think that's what I can say at this point from their standpoint.
And I asked a question.
Very diplomatic.
I asked a question to be fair, because I know other people are going to ask the question.
Yeah.
What are they going to do?
Yeah.
We're going here, where are they going to go?
Right. The one thing I can say is the 3 superintendents and myself are really have the kids' best interest and making sure the services can be provided in all 3 districts. So that's just going to look a little bit different because of the needs in the districts. But they're, in addition to the students and families, also the staff. We're really thinking about the staff and how this may impact them. And honestly, I don't think there's going to be much impact to the staff.
My only other question is, and I'm asking because I don't know the answer, when was the last time Tiverton had their own special education?
Not since 1975.
75. Okay.
So it's been a long time.
All right, so it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if this happens, I think it can be an exciting time as well.
Okay. Mrs. Pava?
Have no questions.
Mrs. Farnworth?
I do have a couple of specific questions that I know you can answer, like this. Outside of the regular school year programs that are run within our schools and for those students that get bused to Middletown,
Yeah.
what other programs does the region currently provide that we would be looking to bring in-house in order to maintain the same level of service
Outside the school year.
outside of the school year?
Okay, so extended school year programming, we run in actually both districts. We do have a regional program that we currently run in Middletown, but it is staffed by 2 Tiverton teachers and 2 Middletown teachers. So my thoughts, again, early thoughts on that, is that we would just have the 2 Tiverton teachers here in Tiverton during ESY and run the same program, and Middletown would do it in Middletown.
Okay. And
And then we already run our own elementary one here in Tiverton on our own, not a regional one.
okay.
A summer one?
We do. Yep.
And what about the Transition Academy?
Yeah, so all of the programs are my favorite programs, but those might be my 2 favorite programs. So that is something that Dr. Sanchioni, Mrs. Krager, and Dr. Dias-Mitchell do want to talk about. We think that could be actually a couple programs we could still share in some form or fashion, but it wouldn't be like part of an assessment. We would have to determine how that would be shared, but those services that we have created are really top-notch. In fact, the state just came down and did an audit, and they want us to go out and kind of showcase our programming. So that's something we're going to work on trying to keep in place, but just have to figure out how we're going to do that.
Okay. Are there any others that I'm not thinking of?
No, those were great questions. No, all of the other programs, as far as preschool programs, any sort of programs for students who have developmental disabilities, autism, behavior, or social emotional needs, we already have those. It's just going to be changing that a little bit. When we bring our kids back, it just might look a little bit different where they're located.
That's all I have for the moment.
Okay, Mrs. Pelish?
So, we have those, intensive classrooms where, wherever.
Yep.
A lot of them are here, some
Yep.
of them are in Middletown. Those would just be, they'd have to be split up. We just have to host our own, and
Right.
Little Compton, Middletown would host
Right.
their own as well.
Right.
Okay.
And the numbers support that, not just numbers, the needs. The needs support that right now, where those classrooms are even at capacity. So we would have to look at opening another program. And then when you start to do that, it's like, well, maybe if we split that program up and just had Middletown and Tiverton, then we would be able to do that. So it's just the needs are expanding.
That's all I have. I have more discussion for the committee, but that's all I have for Sarah. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Farley?
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Okay, any questions from the public online? Any from our administrators or others present? So, thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome. More to come. More to come.
Yes, more to come, yes. And Deb, you sort of left that open a little bit. You have something else or other?
Yeah, I think,
Things you wanna talk about?
at least in our initial discussions, this is our first one in open, but at least in our initial discussions, I know we all talked about really how important it was to get feedback from our parents who utilize the system currently and other taxpayers' constituents. And I'm thinking, this is a big move. It deserves a lot of discussion. I'm wondering if we don't set a meeting specific, that this wouldn't have to be the only topic, but say we
perhaps
pick
better
the
notice
second
it.
meeting in January, and that we have some sort of robocall or announcement that goes out just letting people know, hey, this topic is being discussed, and it's going to be at this meeting, just so that we can start to garner that outside feedback, because it's kind of, I don't know what I don't know, and I'd love to hear from other teachers if they'd love to share thoughts, but certainly our parents who have been using the system, or the region, I meant.
And we
So-
we do have a venue for that, too. The region has a special education local advisory committee made up of parents and teachers, so that will definitely be the topic item of our next meeting. So we do have a venue where we will be communicating that to parents, but certainly if we need other ones. And that's, again, one of our focuses is to make sure our communication is on time and transparent. This is still really early right now.
Yeah, I'm
on the same
thinking
page with
specific
that.
to, so the decision makers in this case are the school boards, so I'm thinking, so one that would be specific to Tiverton, that certainly would be great, and that'll be in addition to, but I'm thinking more something that would be specific to just this board.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea.
Whatever
Unless-
date we decide.
Yeah, unless others object, I would say, why don't we set the second meeting in January that will have that as a specific agenda item, and notice our, all of our families and parents and staff that are directly involved, so that they can come and
So the
scream at
Janu-
us, throw
so
us
the
money,
Janu- The January
something.
24th meeting?
Probably the latter, right? That's what usually
That's
happens.
correct.
And Dr. Sanquioni, you'll make sure that communication goes
Yep,
out?
will do.
May I
Okay.
also make a suggestion that as part of that meeting, that some kind of a, I hate to use a PowerPoint, be put together that explains
What's wrong with
really,
PowerPoint?
well, that really
World
explains
lived by PowerPoint.
the components of what goes into this decision, what the impacts are expected to be programmatically, financially, and, I dare say pros and cons. So that we can have a robust discussion amongst ourselves and amongst our community stakeholders, so that we do come to the correct decision for the kids in Tiverton.
Sounds good.
Work
Thank
with you
you.
on that, Sarah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank
Anything
you.
else? Anyone else? Okay.
Good.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think
Thank
this
you.
is, I think it's an exciting topic, and I think it's probably one that was a long time coming, especially after Portsmouth left the district. So thank you so much for coming.
Okay. You haven't lived without a good PowerPoint. Until you've had a good PowerPoint, I should say.
I know
All right.
Sarah does a real nice PowerPoint.
She does.
She's got a great PowerPoint.
That's your real motive, is to get a nice, a nice Krager PowerPoint. Okay. Next up is item 9C, stipends. Dr. Sanquioni?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Per your request, I've given you a document in your packet that lists the unfunded clubs at the middle school and the high school. I'll leave it there for you.
Okay, so this was something we had requested just to look at. I have to go find it. I'll open the floor to questions. We don't really need to take a vote on anything here. Mrs. Palish?
I'm just trying to find it, but maybe this is for Ms. Roderick. Is there a number behind, like, how much it would cost to take them all if we budgeted them? Or did we not total them?
I'll jump in on that, Ms.
Oh,
Palish.
that's fine.
We
Thank you.
haven't set the stipends for them because they all have different times and different components to
Oh,
it. If you
okay.
want us to do that, we certainly can.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, think I would like to know, and then, I mean, because it kind of comes up every year, and it would be nice to know at least what that number would be if we chose to, if we get a windfall and,
Can I suggest that we make this discussion a separate part of the budget discussion this year?
Sure.
So that,
Yeah.
no, that's a good idea.
But
So that's
for a
perfect.
piece of the budget discussion on its own.
Yep.
All right, anything else, Deb? No, that's it. Mrs. Farnworth? other than what you just said?
No, thank you.
Mrs. Pavo?
Nothing.
Mr. Dakotas?
No.
Okay.
Before we leave that, Mr.
Yep.
Chairman, just for guidance, so I could help the principals with this, there seemed to be, some concern of using revenue that the schools have through other sources to pay for some of our stipends. And our middle school was fortunate enough, again, to get the golden ticket and has $5,000 at the disposal to do things. And, the principals asked me that, we have a strategic plan that wants to involve as many kids as possible in after-school activities. Is that a direction that would be acceptable?
Well, so I guess that was the thing I was going to bring up, which is, I think the other document that we need in addition to this, and I know we probably didn't really specify that, is to lay out what we are paying for and what we're paying. Because to sort of Deb's point, each activity has different requirements, and some of the stipends are different. I think in particular some of the sports at the high school level don't have just one stipend associated with them. They actually have a few different ones for different coaching positions and things like that. So I think that would help to know exactly what that delta is, what those, or not delta, I don't know what the word is, but what that expenditure is. Also, what are we funded through one-time sources or sources which are not necessarily stable? Not that the budget itself is terribly stable, but we are probably forever going to have a football coach, right?
Yeah, you have a multitude of athletic and stipend positions in the budget.
Right.
And so I guess my question is, there's unfunded positions.
Right.
You approved last time principals are totally to fund some of those
Right.
unfunded positions because he had revenue.
Right.
And
That's what I'm getting at. So there are things that are budgeted, and I
Right.
expect will continue to be budgeted, because if we
Yep.
cut them,
Yep, they will
all
be
hell
next
would break
year's
loose.
request.
So to me, the question is that revenue part of the budget that we should be dispersing? Or is it revenue that goes to the school and they can spend as they, really, that's the question.
Yeah, I think, and I would have to look at I think that's a question of policy, and I'd have to look at the
Yeah.
policy to figure out where it falls. So every organization has to be approved by us. I know that's for sure.
Right, but if we have an instance where, I don't know, a grant.
Right.
And the
it's
grant
completely-
didn't get, it's completed, but it didn't get all spent, do the principals have the authority, and I think this is Peter's question, to use that in another way without, like a stipend?
Right.
I
and
guess
there's
I'm
also-
not sure what the
Stipends,
answer.
we always come to you for approval for a new position, which is why we
Activity.
came to you
Right.
last time. And I guess it's just the funding of it. We know it's one-time revenue, but if, again, right now, the principal has, the $5,000 at his disposal. You can look on the list here, he'd like to see those activities run.
Right.
But I just want to give him some guidance.
Well, and that's, I guess, what I'm getting at, and is knowing what we are funding, what funds appear to be stable within the budget, or what positions appear to be stable within the budget, what positions have we funded as a one-time, and it's better to fund something as a one-time than to not have it at all, recognizing that it may not occur the next year. What things are we not funding at all? And that's kind of picking winners and losers. And all of it, I think everyone, the sense has been, we all feel like there's an inequity there in terms of not funding things or funding things as a one-time. What would, if we were gonna say, okay, we want to have these activities, and every time we add an activity or don't have an activity or don't fund an activity, what's the cost there? And I think clearly activities tend to probably do better if we are funding them, because then then there's a sponsor within the district who's actually working to make it a success. So that's, this is just part of the information.
So for now, are you saying that for now, for the budget conversation, we just want to know what's unfunded and what it'll cost? We aren't necessarily identifying revenue sources at this point?
Yeah, and again, to the point of, if there's an unrestricted revenue source that is just given to the principal to do with whatever they want with, then that's great, and that's, one thing that they may use one year but maybe not the next year. Or to your point, if there's a grant that if it's not completely exhausted by the intended purpose, can it be diverted to something else?
And to me, I
That usually
think,
depends on the grant.
and maybe Amy can weigh in, I think that's a different discussion. It's like,
Yeah.
it's almost like, well, if there's extra revenue from whatever the source is, maybe the policy is they can spend it on whatever they want. So it's not really a stipend question per se, it's more,
A grant might be a stretch too, because the grants
Yeah,
have
grants
specific
usually-
purpose, and we
Right.
document that, and we usually don't
but
just
like
extend
the
it out.
money left over from the, and again, understanding that many of us didn't like it, but the fact that we have money that comes back from the picture taking, that kind of stuff. So that's probably a different discussion. It seems like to me, it's not really about
Yeah.
funding stipends, it's about what kind of extra monies is really at their disposal if it
And-
doesn't get spent to,
And that would be something you would have to write policy about. I don't think we have a policy that really governs right now. But the thing I really want to know right now is,
what'll it cost?
what would it cost if we sort of said, okay, we feel that this is a valuable experience for the students. It's, there's all kinds of things that keep kids in school. Sometimes it's their parents saying you have to go to school. That's what I do. Or sometimes it's, I'm involved in sports, or I'm involved in drama, or I'm involved in music, and that's the hook that keeps a kid engaged and wanting to come to school. So these are all important things. And so that's where I get kind of a little bit uncomfortable thinking that we're picking winners and losers by funding some things and not funding some things. We're not making the program as robust as we could by not funding things. So I want to know what's the price tag for all of it. So it would include things that we think are stable within the budget. We're not going to cut the football coach. Things that we funded through one-time funding sources, things that we're not funding at all. That's been my,
So you want those three bodies of information?
May I-
Okay.
yeah.
You have, and the budget's clear.
That's what I
We just
want.
pull those pages. The unfunded, the one time is what you approved last time, so that's only at the middle school, but I'll give you that list again, and this is at the unfunded.
Or wherever it is, yeah.
Yeah, so you have a lot of the information, but we'll put it in a straight packet for you.
All right. Diane, you had something?
Just 2 points. First off, I do think that this list, as well as all of the stipended positions, needs to be part of the routine budget
Yeah.
discussion each year.
Every
Because
year.
honestly, some of these clubs can change.
They do.
We all know that, interest in one club may ebb and flow over time, and you may want to fund it this year, you may not want to fund it next year, because there hasn't been any interest, what have you. So I think that's where this discussion needs to be, as to how much we're going to commit to paying for stipends overall for clubs and activities. The other thing, 2 other points, actually. First is a question, and I'm just noticing it now, and first of all, a number of stipended positions are in the collective bargaining agreement. So we are committed regardless.
Well, committed as much
If-
as you
if
have the
those-
revenue to fund them.
If those activities are there, we're committed to funding them, right? If we employ people to do
Well,
these
it's
jobs.
committed to the fact that you have the revenue to fund them, like every position that's in
Okay.
there. It's all subject to your revenue.
Okay. And then, lastly, for the middle school sports in particular, because I'm thinking back to my time here, we've approved new sports more than once on the contingency that it was not going to cost the district anything, because the district has been at a loss for funding, if you will. And those two ebb and flow over time. So, it's just something I prefer to have this discussion every budget season, make a commitment for this year to fund these activities, and then next year it may change.
But does that eliminate then, if a principal has revenue, that because you didn't fund it, they?
Well, I think this year's,
Okay.
this year's allocation was for fiscal year 2023 only. I don't think it was in perpetuity.
No, I'm, for FY '23, we can pull that budget page, we can show you what, my question
I think it's
is,
a different discussion, Peter.
Right.
It's
There's
if
positions we
there's
don't-
extra money, do the principals have
Right.
the authority through you, through Amy, to spend it? On whatever.
well, but if it's a club or an activity, we need your approval, and that's why, that's what, you know, we got hung up a little bit last time, and that's sort of what I'm asking you now.
Well, you need approval to start I'm sorry, I don't have my mic on. You need approval to start it, but unless we say, you know what, put them all in the budget, there's still going to be some that are unfunded. And to your point is we've already approved it, they're already going, and we've determined during the budget discussion, let's say we determine there's 20 we can't fund. And you're saying if my principal has extra money somewhere and they want to fund it,
Can they?
and they really shouldn't have to go back to us, is kind of that, because you already approved it,
Well, if you
right,
set that structure, sure.
right.
But right now, we come to you and.
But to Jerry's point, I wonder if that shouldn't be,
There's,
Policy.
I don't think there's a policy that governs right now.
so when we're absent a policy, it's usually at the superintendent's
Yeah.
discretion, but.
Yeah, the potential checkpoint is if they wanted to fund a position that, or an activity that isn't already approved. That is policy.
Right, which is why we came to you last
But
time.
I don't think there is any policy, and, I don't pretend to know every single word of every single policy, but I don't think there is a policy that says money that a principal or the superintendent has at their discretion can't be used to fund an activity as long as it had already been approved by the school committee at some prior date. So right now, middle school soccer is still approved, not happening. If it were to happen, I don't think there's a policy that would prevent the principal if he or she had money at their disposal to pay a stipend for it, as long as that money was clearly at their disposal. That's what I don't think
I
that there's a policy.
hesitate to back something like that, only because it's a slippery slope.
No, I don't think there's a policy that governs right now.
Yeah, and
So
now,
that's what you would have to
I think a
do.
policy would be best, because you could open the door to having building level administrators deciding that they want to start paying people for any number of things, including running clubs and
I
sports.
don't know if they have thousands of dollars at their disposal.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, I know, and that's
It's a
what I'm.
very good point, and I think it's something we need to address, though. But it's a very good point, Peter.
So,
I would like to just make, can you hear me?
yep.
I just want to make one point, because I know that I'm the one that brought the baseball and softball with Mr. Soa, so we still will pay for that for this year coming up. I know it's on this list, but after this year, it should be part of the discussion.
Well, there's programmatic costs, and then there's the stipends, which are also very different. I mean, there's no
Yes.
programmatic cost
And I think
supporting
right now
middle school
we're just
soccer.
focusing on the stipend.
Yes,
Right.
and these stipends for these two coaches will be under the purview of what we're gonna raise and donate
Right.
for this year. So.
All right. Anything else, Mrs. Pavo? I don't know if I've given you an opportunity to. Mr. Farley?
Yeah, just to Ms. Farnworth and Ms. Balish's point, I think it would be, excuse me, I think it would be important also, in addition to, looking and making sure that these clubs are active, getting a perspective on, what exactly is happening, just as different positions in a coaching environment might have different funding. Not every club needs $10,000 or something. And also not every club has 30 students. So that's another important thing to gauge, student involvement. Because if we want to get more students involved, we want to have an idea of where they're going.
Right. Well, and I think that's, to the point why some things have been traditionally or historically funded or the stipends associated with them are pretty stable, is because the work, can be much more substantial. I guess it depends. Okay.
May I just ask one more question?
Sure.
I apologize.
Love means never having to say you're sorry.
Thank you. The mock trial team, do we still have one both at the high school and the middle school?
Correct.
And are those compensated?
Yes.
They are. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so hearing no other discussion, we're going to move on to item 9D, discussion possible vote, NEA contract 2022-2025. Dr. Sanquioni?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it's a pleasure to say to you tonight that we have reached agreement with the NEA. They have actually ratified a contract that was worked on. Thank you, Dr. Locke, and thank you, Mr. Dakotas, for being part of that and going through it. We had some great language changes that I think benefits our staff and our students. Financially, I think we came with a nice agreement. I heard through the ratification meeting that they were like 96% said yes, which is maybe an all-time high for them, which is very positive. So I know you had the document. We've reviewed it, the language and the financials, so it's in your court now to approve it.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the NEA contract.
I'll make a motion to approve the 3-year NEA contract.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and I'll just, I guess to echo Dr. Sanquioni's words, this was a really harmonious, I felt, good discussion where everyone was heard, everyone had an opportunity to offer their input, and I think that there was always a clear sense of interest in the good of the district, the good of the town, the financial stability of the town and the district, as well as the important mission of educating our children, keeping them safe, and supporting our staff, and making sure that their professional development was encouraged and supported. So I'd like to thank Mr. Dakotas, Dr. Sanquioni, and our NEA partners, Mrs. Furtado, Mrs. Destrams, and our UNISERV representatives, Alex, whose last name I can't remember off the top of my head, and Leslie Florio. So, it was really a good series of negotiations. So, Mike, anything else you want to offer?
Nope, just echoing everything, and thanks to our own Kristen Destrup for, I know, her first time, my first time. Harmonious is a good word to describe it. Great for the district, and looking forward to the next 3 years.
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor. Any other comments from members of the committee? Otherwise, I'll ask for a vote. Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pava?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
And I vote yes, so it is unanimous. So, again, thank you, Dr. Sanquioni and NEA. So next is item 9E, to sign the RIDE statewide bond pay-as-you-go memorandum of agreement. Peter, I don't know if you want to explain this.
Sure, yeah, they should look pretty familiar to you. You've signed multiple of these in the past. This is how the district gets reimbursed for projects that are on our stage 2s that's gone through RIDE approval, and they try to pay us as we accrue these bills. So you have one in front of you now on a project that was approved for $2.6 million, around numbers there, and the first pay-go coming back to us is $52,400. So it does require everyone's signature. That's why it's in our packet tonight. If you're comfortable with it, Ms. Roderick will pass around the original and get everyone's signature this evening.
Going to open the floor to any questions by the committee. Mrs. Palish?
None.
Mrs. Farnworth?
The only question I have is the date of this document. I'm trying to understand, are we going to be signing every time a bill is paid? Or is this for the entire contract of the 2.6 million?
The entire, so once you sign this, then they'll just keep giving us the pay as you go, but you've approved the payment process. As we submit the bills, we get paid.
Okay, and then what is the date of May 17th, 2022 referring to? Is this,
For funding,
obviously, we're in December. Right, at the first paragraph.
That's when this, sorry, excuse me. Can you folks hear me? Sorry about that. So, to answer your question, the May 17th is when the SBA Council approved the pay-as-you-go funding for all the municipalities.
Okay.
So that has nothing to do with us. As a
quick primer. So even with the funding every year for the housing aid, it goes to the SBA Council for approval before they officially start dispersing the funds. This is very similar. This is, instead of having to wait for $52,000 of a project, we can submit it as we go. Okay. I think it's just like a funding relief mechanism, to give you a little bit of startup funds to get your projects going and get reimbursed.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Pavo? Mr. Dakotas?
No, thank you.
Okay, so this is just signing your name, not a vote. So if no other questions, going to ask for a motion to continue item 9F pending review by the school district's attorney.
So moved. I'll second it.
So motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Fabo?
Yes.
Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Next is item 9G, discuss possible vote referral to policy subcommittee. So this was, I guess, my item, although my name's not next to it. And this was just to refer 4 different policies to the policy subcommittee. Policy number 739 regarding the agenda, policy number 1012, public complaints grievances, policy number 332 and 333, which is regarding budget and movement in funds, and policy number 993, which actually is the one that we removed either last meeting or the meeting before. And so it's to replace that policy to help govern how we make hirings outside of the collective bargaining agreements. And the reason I'm asking for these to be referred is basically it helps clarify for all of us kind of how some of these issues should be governed between the school committee and the superintendent, and sort of how we do the work that we do. So if someone would like to make a motion, we can open the discussion.
I'll make a motion to refer these to the policy subcommittee.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. So I'll open the floor to discussion. Mrs. Farnworth?
We didn't have any backup explanation, so I guess I'll ask you for each, starting with the agenda policy. What are you thinking we need to change on that? That's one of the relatively new ones.
Yeah, so probably what I didn't make as explicit, it's not necessarily to change any of them, it is to review them as well as then decide if they needed any changes.
Okay.
So it's really just to give the 3 of us and whoever else wants to come an opportunity to kind of like, let's read through this and see, does it need to be changed? How will changing it or not changing it help us continue to do the work we're trying to do?
Okay. Thank you.
And that's true for all of them, actually. Ms. Palish?
I have no objections. I have a couple I'll add, but that seems like plenty.
Okay. Yeah, well, once you get into that policy tab, there's almost no getting out of it. Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mr. Dakotas? Okay, I'll ask for a vote. Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Okay, and I guess we'll sort of figure out when we're going to meet Diane and Peter. Next is item number 10, old business, a structural deficit. Ms. Roderick.
Mrs. Roderick makes me sound like my mother. Danny, can you do me a favor and go to the last page of the packet, yeah, and can you horizontal it? There we go. Okay. So this worksheet should look familiar. Thank you, Mrs. Farnworth, for the format. I have gone in and updated the numbers for FY23 through FY27 based on the contract ratification for NEA with the presumption that the same would happen with Council 94, just for planning purposes. And as you can see, in the current year, we have covered the structural deficit with our entitlement grants as well as ESSER 3. And going forward, again, if we were to get 4% per year from the town and limiting costs to those estimated percentages that I have on the left, we would be out of the structural deficit in FY28. In the meantime, for FY24, we would have whatever would be small amounts remaining for ESSER 3. I think we have some very small dollars there, but then would have to use fund balance and Medicaid to cover that, and then get creative in the years after that, which is all of which we already know. And I am open to discussion on how you want to take the conversation going forward from here.
Okay, I'll open it up to discussion by the school committee. Who would like to go first? Ms. Dakotas.
I nominate Ms. Farworth to go first.
Ms. Farnorth?
Can you see my eyes behind this mask?
I will gain questions through your questions.
Sure, I'll take a first stab at it. Thank you, Amy, for bringing this in. I'm not sure what happened with the rest of the packet, but for tonight's discussion, I think we're fine.
I'm sorry, the rest of the packet?
We had put together a growing number of pieces of documentation that we were to basically be following through the process. Well, you made all those charts, right?
Okay.
I think when I initially proposed the structure of this exercise, it would get us to a point pretty much right now, because we're at our last meeting of the year, to come up with a plan, on a school committee plan, and something that we could vote upon and decide next steps. Clearly, we didn't make it that far in our discussions. We basically really haven't even scratched the surface as to ideas on how to, number one, look at the expense drivers and come up with ideas out of the box, if you will, and also, contemplate what we could realistically expect to receive in funding increases from the town. Because I don't for a moment think we're going to get 4% every year from now through fiscal 2027. I just don't think it's realistic.
Okay.
But I do want to thank you for that. I do have a few ideas, and I'll just throw this one out there to start the discussion, that, perhaps we, as a district, look at increasing participation in grant opportunities. I know we already do take advantage of several grant opportunities, but is there a way to increase that to fund specific programs? And could we consider a way to maybe incentivize people for coming up with those opportunities? If we take in $2 million, can we consider making payment to whoever came to us with that $2 million as a thank you for writing the grant, or even coming up with the grant idea? That, again, this is just me coming up with the first, hey, this is an idea. And I don't know if anyone else came this evening to be prepared to throw things out as well.
Okay.
That's
Thank
an
you.
interesting prospect. I wonder if
Yeah.
it's legal.
Off the top of my head, I don't believe it is, but
I would
we
say
can.
no, just because it's taxpayer
It's dependent on the
dollars.
grant. The grant will stipulate whether you can, pay people out of it.
It's a great
or
idea,
not.
though.
So, but just, I would say to you, it's a great idea, and as you know, we do
Yeah.
capitalize on every grant we can, but it's always one-time revenue. Like, these grants just don't reoccur, but to continue to pursue them, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm taking this lesson from the town side. It seems that our police chief is finding free vehicles at every turn. And, the value of those vehicles can be substantial, as you know. And, you know, I'm not saying he's being incentivized to do that, but he definitely is gaining the benefit by getting cars for his patrols. And other portions of the town are gaining as well. So, you know, it got me to thinking, you know, how can we perhaps, even if it's just by celebrating these grants more prominently, to encourage people to think about new opportunities.
Not
So-
that, sorry,
Okay.
go ahead, Dr.
No, you
Larkin.
go ahead.
Not that I want to add to the list of policies, but if we were to do that, I would like to establish a policy around it. Only my government and nonprofit experience has me a little nervous for us to undertake that without having, you know, a really formal policy
That's a
around
great
it.
point. Yep.
Not that I'm an advocate for more policies than necessary, but, and, you know, how it would be administered, it would have to come through central office and things like that. People could not administer them on their own type of thing.
Nope, very good points. will
I interrupted you,
yield and
Dr.
throw it
Larkin,
to
I'm
anyone
sorry.
else.
I interrupted you, I'm sorry.
So certainly nonprofits employ grant writers who
They do.
specifically are.
That's all they do.
That's all they do.
Yep.
The question I would have about that is how much uncaptured funding is out there. And I have no idea how you would gauge that. And then also exploring the idea of having a person that would do both the town and the school district as a grant writer to see if there's some way of increasing funding. The problem there is that it's gonna, again, how you even measure what the what uncaptured grant money is out there, and then the grants usually come for a very specific purpose, and I would think that if your intention is to ultimately be funding operations out of it, that seems like it would hurt the potential grant intrinsically. Like I didn't really put that very elegantly, but it is to do sort of operational things. It's going to be hard to write a creative grant that would actually let you do that.
No, but if you could fund
Yeah.
one-time things like police cars, it frees up money to spend on your operations.
That's also
the
true.
goal.
Yeah.
You could fund
That's
new
the goal.
furniture,
Okay.
any number of things.
Yeah, okay. Valid. So that would be one thing to do. My suspicion is we are ultimately going to have to ask for over 4% in order to close the deficit. And I think there's some justification there for that in the sense that and I'm going to get the probably fiscal year screwed up, I think it was FY20. Maybe it was 21.
21.
It was FY21. We had contractual obligations that rose as by their contract, as well as costs that we had no control over, and yet we had no increase, even though initially the budget committee had voted for a 2% increase that year. I think we have to explore at least what the process is of going over the cap, and at least open the discussion of saying, that 2% needs to be restored, because that really does explain a lot of the structural deficit that we have now. Some of it's also, energy costs and transportation and healthcare costs and the variance in special education. Those are the things that I think, off the top of my head, I think were significant enough and had enough fluctuation in them that you can explain that also explains the structural deficit. And I think the discussion has to be had, and the decision has to be made ultimately by the voters of the town to either try and recoup that 2%, because that will shorten the period of time as well that you would get out of the structural deficit by other increases that are not going over the cap. I think that's always where this discussion has had to go. And I guess I'm the first to say it. Be the first to be recalled. Anyone else? Mike, turn your microphone on.
I'm not sure if I can even ask a question.
Please ask.
I probably shouldn't. They would say.
Go.
K through 8
Mhm.
are neighbors.
Our neighbors, meaning
Little Compton?
Little
Compton.
I know that they have their high school, they don't have a high school. They go to Portsmouth, that's their choice. Is there ever any opportunity to talk about, I don't know if, that's why I'm saying, I don't, probably walking on eggshells here. But since we're talking about finances, is there ever an opportunity to have that discussion that we would be able to join and look at what that does financially K through 8? Especially since part of our earlier discussion was about special education.
Join who?
Have them join us?
Regionalization.
We had that discussion
Yeah, we had that discussion.
in June.
Yeah.
So just to walk you through the process, Mike, they actually asked for bids from us and from Portsmouth, Bristol, and Middletown, I think. And they had an outside consultant review all their bids. We actually came out on top of their, the rubric. So every 10 years they go for, and this is probably I guess I'll belabor that point because it will be helpful for the public to know this as well. So every 10 years they go out for contract for their 9 through 12.
They being Little Compton
Little Compton
High
goes out,
Schools.
right.
Yeah.
So Little Compton goes out and they do their contract. Their contract is up, I believe, at the end of 2023 right now, which is with Portsmouth. So they went out for bid. We submitted a bid. Middletown, Bristol Warren, and Portsmouth submitted a bid. They had established a rubric and a subcommittee in order to evaluate the bids, and they had an outside contractor, consultant, come in and evaluate the bids. When the rubric was applied, we came out on top. Their consultant said we came out on top. At the same meeting, there was a presentation by their administration that sort of went through different things, but primarily they cited the U.S. News and World Report based on data that's extracted but not necessarily verified by a U.S. News and World Report, but sells magazines, so they like it, and said, well, Portsmouth is a better school district, and also reflected data that's actually was not just extracted at a distance. It wasn't like they came and they looked at Portsmouth High School and looked at Tiverton's High School and sort of interviewed people. It's just stuff they draw out of reporting that is submitted to RIGL and national things like that. So anyway, so their administration presented this stuff saying, well, Portsmouth actually comes out on top on these things that had nothing to do with their consultant or their rubric or the bids submitted by each of the districts. Their subcommittee then made a final recommendation to their school committee, which then voted to continue their contract with Portsmouth or to renew their contract with Portsmouth, even though actually Portsmouth was charging them more than Tiverton was, by the bid at any rate. So that's a really long-winded answer, but I think it's important to know that we certainly investigated that thoroughly.
Was that your
Dr.
question?
Larkin?
I
No, I
thought
don't
your
think it
question was considering regionalizing with Little Compton,
For K
Portsmouth,
through
and
8.
Tiverton, K through 8.
not the high school.
Yeah, so,
Oh.
well, hold on,
So you tell us
yeah,
what
yeah,
you
yeah,
meant.
Well, I don't
Yeah,
think-
I misunderstood the question,
No, no, I don't
but I think it's a valuable
It
thing for
was. It
people
was
to
a valuable
understand.
piece
I
of
don't think
information.
what Dr. Larkin just did is invaluable, because when
No, I
you
agree.
open up Pandora's box,
Yeah.
everything he said is true.
Mm-hmm.
And a magazine's data, or whatever you want to call it, opinion, okay, so that's what was decided for high school. Sort of my back question is, if we were able to regionalize with K through 8 at one school, wouldn't that be something that eventually could lower our costs?
So regionalize with K through 8 Little Compton.
Correct.
I think, and I can't speak for them, but I will speak for Tiverton and our experience when we tried to regionalize our own schools. So if you remember, when we had the 4 schools, Nonquit, Ranger, we had the Pecasset and
Closed
Fort
one.
Barton, we closed one. There was a big push to regionalize and have one big K through 8 school, and our own community said, no, we want neighborhood schools. So I am just guessing that that would be Little Compton's response as well, that, for K through 8, for our youngest learners, that neighborhood schools are better. So I think that would, again, I can't speak for them. I can only speak
No,
to the
right.
experience we had.
And in my mind too, and I know that Middletown and Newport have been going through this, but when you're looking at busing and special education needs, and you start adding up a lot of things, there's money to be saved without total disruption. But I guess it was something I wanted to throw, since we're being really outside the box. I thought that was an outside the box point to bring up that. I mean, it's 2022, expenses are skyrocketing, sure for them, just like for us. So I don't know how much of a difference it makes, but
Sort of doing the
I-
sort of back of the envelope math in my head. I also don't necessarily think it would be a one-for-one benefit financially when I say that for every dollar we brought in, X percent of that dollar would go to additional expenses. So, whether it's 20%, 50%, whatever that is. And then if I recall correctly, if we were to do that, how that would look, I'm not sure, but I know that our elementary schools at the moment, I think, are bursting at the seams, or they are. So, but I understand what you're
doesn't that
saying.
give us some more, I don't know how many classrooms are in that building.
Yeah.
I don't know how much they could take, but if we are bursting at some point, wouldn't that make sense that opens up a little, you know what I mean?
Well, again, it depends on how we map it out, but, we would definitely probably benefit, not that I'm looking to spend money, because I never want to spend money, but, look at a consultant to potentially help us map that out, even from a financial perspective, and obviously Dr. Sanquioni from the educational perspective. It's all options from my side of the table, which is the numbers. All the options are there. I'm happy to crunch the numbers. I'm happy to think outside of the box. And just because I'm the most familiar with these numbers doesn't mean I have all the answers. So I'm willing to entertain anything.
And just because.
But you can't tango with half a partner. I mean,
That's true. That's true.
I mean, you'd need Little Compton to
Oh,
say
for
yes.
sure.
Yeah.
He'd be interested, and
It's gotta be.
I'm not sure I see it as, but you're right. I mean, somewhere,
Can I get the superintendent's opinion on that? Is that okay? Since we're in this conversation.
On potential K regionalization?
Your microphone's on.
I mean, what it would do for what we're talking about, the bottom line, getting our budget back to, so we're not in deficit spending, classroom sale, that sort of, like in the next 3 years, we have all these communities coming, houses being built, more students, we're talking about where are we gonna put them, right?
Just
What-
work like that.
No?
Because you're gonna bring X number of students into Tiverton if that was agreed upon. If they decided, yes, I do this. But you're gonna take some of those expenses that they have and bring them to Tiverton also. You may need, if they have 8 teachers, you may need 3 of those teachers. You may need an additional principal. So that's an expense to us. Would we be receiving enough money in tuitions to cover that?
that was what I was getting at with the back of the
I
envelope
think
math.
It isn't just clear cut. we're gonna take on 100 students, and that's gonna give us $200,000 in revenue. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work, because there are expenses that come across from that other building, other department.
Still on.
You just want to hear, well, you have, to Ms. Palish's point, I mean, first you have to have a willing partner, and you have to have space to absorb kids. And if you want to transfer your kids out, you'd only do that if you were way over capacity, and you were then judging, putting an addition on range, for illustrative purposes only. Is it cost-worthy to put an addition on range or modulars on range, or take those 50 kids and move them to another district? Is that district willing to take those kids? You're going to pay that tuition. You know, there'd be so much analysis going on. In the long term of what you're talking about here, looking at a structural deficit, I don't think there's an impact at all.
Thank you.
Dr. Larkin?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that we used to do, and not to introduce more data, but we like data, is if you look at our per pupil costs, and I was looking at it preparing for the meeting tonight, for some districts that are similar in size, we're higher. For some districts that are similar in size, we're lower. And I guess we used to look at UCOA data at the per pupil level, if you recall, and understand what's driving definitely the higher. Like, why are we higher than North Smithfield on a per pupil basis? And they have the same number of students. And I'm picking, it may not even be them. I remember someone, I don't know if it was them. And I remember when we looked at the data, there were instances we were higher, but it was a decision to be higher. If you know what, it wasn't, okay, well, they're lower, but they don't have the CTE, or they didn't, it was a definite decision. So I don't know if we would find that to be useful anymore to, sort of go back to, breaking things down to a per pupil level and saying, where are we high? I think we used to compare ourselves to the state and the urban ring and kind of see, like, well, where are we spending more than the state? Where are we spending more than the ring? And why? And just sort of understanding that, because before, I think that's something that the community and certainly members of the community are going to want to see and understand before we go and say, you know what, we're going to bust the cap or even ask 4%, is we just really need to understand what's driving our per pupil costs. Some of it, I would guess, Amy, is, we don't have the economies of scale sometimes that other districts do. So, when you have a smaller population, you still need the same number of teachers, but theirs looks cheaper because, they just are spreading it out a bigger population. That has always been an issue for us. We're at that weird, but I didn't know if anyone would be interested in sort of going back to, during our budget discussions and sort of, there was one particular level, we didn't look at all of them, there was one particular level we sort of looked at, or you just feel like that's going to be data overload. That would be the only thing I would like to potentially take a look at, but whether we think it's useful or not. Because I think the more we can explain and the more that we say we've looked at this, the better.
Okay. Anyone else? So,
Dr. Larkin,
yep.
unless you wanted to go.
Nope. Go ahead.
I just have two things, one on each side of the ledger, if you will. The first is state legislative advocacy. In this projection, Ms. Roderick has indicated a flat state aid projection, and I understand why. Because we really can't know for certain, right, what our populations are going to look like, and we certainly can't know what the state funding formula is going to look like.
Correct.
But I do think, as members of a school board, it really is our job to ensure that our legislators know that we want them advocating for education funding. And I think it's a very important exercise that at least annually we ask them in here to attend a meeting so that we can ask them what they plan to do to help us. You know, we are all, those of the 5 of us are residents and voters of this town, and I don't think it's an unfair ask to turn to our legislators, both in the House and the State Senate, to see what they can do to help move that needle for the kids here in Tiverton. That's one thing, I think, you know, something we need to continue. We've done it before, but I think it's time we do it again.
I'm happy to provide whatever information we need to help educate them
Yeah.
on.
And I do think it's on all of us to follow the process, the budget process at the state level, to understand where certain regions, certain districts, certain regions, types of schools are benefiting where perhaps we may not be. It's definitely a commitment on all of our parts to do that.
Which probably a part of that advocacy is highlighting certain parts of the funding formula that we went through in such detail, because there are poverty factors and things like that, which are justified. I'm not saying, that the students across Rhode Island shouldn't have an equal education. However, just by virtue of circumstance, that I'll use the word hurts Tiverton, because we're not in that same financial class, is for lack of a better phrase. So I think, when we do our advocacy, if we, again, being the numbers person, but, sort of explain to them whether it's, Deb, you talked about the urban ring. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm assuming it's the cities and so forth, and how we compare, but that our costs are potentially disproportionate to our size, type of thing.
No,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, great point. And I think on the other side of the ledger, and I know this may not be a popular opinion, but it is mine. I do think that as a group, as a board, that we could have stronger expense oversight. And this would be to give additional transparency to our town leaders and the taxpayers, to give them a level of confidence that the school district's doing its absolute level best to monitor and hold the line on expenses. That I really do think it is incumbent upon us to pay very close attention to budgeting and expenses as we go. I recognize that expenses are just the nature of the beast, and that the bulk of our expenses indeed are in human resources. But I think, continuing to focus on this and talk about it at meetings on a regular basis is really very important to show the taxpayers of the town that we are doing the very best we can to monitor the spending that they give us.
And perhaps the policy subcommittee, when you review 332 and 333, certainly think about that, keep that in mind.
It's already in mind. Okay. Anything else? So, if I heard properly, and let me know if you guys have anything else to do. So one thing would be to think about exploring a grant writer and/or increasing our grant opportunities. Another would be to look at the UCOA data, and with particular attention to what is actually higher when we compare similar districts. The third would be to see what the process would be to go over the cap of 4%. And, I think this is going to be an important part of the discussion with the town council and the budget committee through this budget process is, there is this deficit. These are some of the reasons for it. And, hear what they have to say. How do you guys want to proceed? The other is to ask our state legislative delegation to talk with us a little bit more about the state funding, and we typically do have them in, usually once they've opened their session in January, so.
I think it's been since pre-COVID at this point,
What is?
since we've had them.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure the last time we had them.
Yeah, it's
I don't
been a
think. I don't remember the last time either, but we used to. And so this is an opportune time to reinstitute it. And then the third is in reviewing the policies regarding the budget to talk a little bit more about how we examine those expenses on an ongoing basis over the next, over the future. Anything else? I don't know how we're going to approach each of those. I think, Peter, if we at least looked at, well, the expenses will be in policy subcommittee. Maybe we can invite the delegation for the first meeting in February? Does that seem reasonable?
If they were
They're-
available.
Yeah, they're not going to be going full bore yet on the budget, but at least let them know. And then maybe in the, I don't know if you want to reach out to Chris Cotta to see if he has any, or Denise and Mike to see if they have any interest in employing a grant writer. I don't know if that's, again, I think that the more difficult part of that is going to be actually understanding what our potential gain is going to be. I don't know if are there other districts that employ grant writers?
Sure.
Your cities usually do, but, so many of these grants are based on your socioeconomic data, and a lot of times we don't qualify, but cities do, so they write grants for everything, and they get funded for everything. But, like I said, we pursue everything we know that's out there that we have a shot at.
But do you know of any, like in the Superintendent's Association meetings, anybody that has a district that employs a grant writer?
I don't, but I would say I know from my Massachusetts days, that all the big cities had, I would imagine Providence does, maybe.
School
East
districts,
Providence.
not
School district, yeah.
Okay. Or maybe that would be something that another district would be interested in.
Yeah, co-sharing
partnering with
sure.
us.
So it's gonna, so,
Okay.
what do we have? Newport's a city.
Newport.
I
But
can
they're
also reach
small.
out to RIASBO and inquire of the districts to see if anyone has a grant
Yeah.
writer, and if they have capacity, or even if they do have a grant writer and they're not willing to share, they can potentially point us in the right direction of grant resources that we can
Yeah.
apply for.
Or while we both think that it's probably illegal to reimburse through those, maybe they have found a way to work it,
Well,
to pay for that employee.
I do
through-
know, so paying a grant writer from the grant
Yeah,
is legal. Paying someone an incentive, and I'll use the word incentive bonus, to bring a grant idea to you is a little bit different.
Right.
So I know that a lot of grant writers
are funded by.
are
the
funded
grant.
by multiple grants for their organization. So it'll be, whatever it is, salary and benefits, $10,000 from grants A, B, C, D, E, and F, type of thing. That is normally acceptable. Most, in my experience, with nonprofits, education, and government, the grantors are not keen on fully funding grant writing positions. They want their dollars to go where the most impact is.
Oh, makes sense.
Which makes sense. But they are, whether you recover that through an indirect cost or an administrative cost allowance, or whether it's an actual salaried or listed item in the grant application, there are sort of all kinds of creative ways outside of an incentive.
okay.
And I'll take on Dr. Larkin, because I know exactly, I can see exactly what I'm thinking of. I'll pull the UCOA data that I was thinking of.
Okay, great.
I know
Rather than
that
have
the-
us both do it.
I know that RIDE now has a quote-unquote UCOA dashboard.
Yes, yeah.
So that should make that fairly simple. And if you need the link and stuff, I can send it
There's
to you.
Okay,
nothing
great.
that's
Thank
simple
you.
at RIDE.
Well,
Before we close that out, how about we try to talk to our legislative people about trying to be swallowed up as part of Massachusetts? That would help us.
We could
and if I may
remain
just
silent
say
on
one
that.
more thing.
Huh?
If I may just say one
Yeah.
more thing. Mrs. Farnworth, I hope you know we do our level best to make sure we're making sure there are no unnecessary expenses.
Oh, I don't dispute that, Amy, but I do think we have to bring more transparency to
Okay.
that, so that the public sees this, that this board sees it and understands it. That's really the point of that.
Unfortunately, my favorite word to Dr. Sanquioni is no.
And Dr. Larkin, if there is any appetite to ask the town council to bust the cap, I would prefer we take a vote on that.
Oh, yeah, I think we would have to vote on it. I'm just saying. I don't even know, I'm not.
I don't have an issue with understanding the process,
Yeah.
but you're
Yes.
right. I don't think we're anywhere near that decision.
Yeah, no, I'm going to ask him tomorrow.
Okay.
No, I think we have to understand what is the process, and then, if they
Especially
start
with the
throwing knives
changes
at us,
in our
we'll know.
charter.
Yeah,
I think it's
exactly.
important we just understand. you
Yeah,
know?
and, I think there's an argument to be made. Now, whether or not there's any resonance with anybody in town about the argument is
So,
another story.
do we want to, since we've tasked somebody with doing all the rest of these, do we want to task Mr. Scungio with talking
Yeah.
with Mr. Marcello to
Yeah.
determine what that process is? Okay.
Yeah, could you communicate that to him, Peter? Thank you. All right. Well, that's cheery. If no other, unless anybody has anything else, I think we'll move off that holiday topic to future meetings dates. We are meeting next Wednesday, and we are going to look, I know we're now going to look at the contract from Bristol Thornton and the communications director, and then executive about board communications and relationships. Anything else for that meeting, Peter? I think those are just the.
I think you covered it. I think that covers the most pressing things we have to get done.
And that's at 6?
That's at 6.
5, 4.
And then we're meeting on January 3rd and 24th. The 3rd is the FY24 budget presentation. And I don't think that we have a date still from the town and clerk about the joint meeting, but it's probably going to be the week of the 9th. So maybe the 10th, I would. But is that the date you can't
Yeah,
make? That's the date you can't
I
make.
can't make that week.
What is the deadline for that meeting by charter?
15th? 15th. The 3rd is our meeting where we're going to have our initial budget presentation.
I might not be able to be on that, but yeah, please, by all means, go ahead.
And then
There'll be more.
what hasn't yet been scheduled is the joint meeting with the town council and the budget committee that has to happen by the January 15th. They were talking about the week of the 9th, but nobody's set a date yet. We haven't heard a date yet from them. And then we are on the 24th is the following meeting. We may, given we are also up against the February 15th deadline for the Stage 2 submission, so there may be more meetings that we'll need to have in January to get that, all of that process through. So the budget committee, or the building committee will be meeting on January 3rd again and be meeting through January, but there may be points where they will have to, where their recommendations will have to come before the school committee in order for it to kind of meet the February 15th deadline. That's the other thing. We have to have the chimney on the 21st, don't we? No. What do we have to have on the 21st? Change orders? We have a change order from the building committee, don't we?
On the, you need to approve the 21,000 change order. Yes,
Yeah, so
yes.
that's next week too, right?
Yep.
So that should be on the agenda for
That will
next
be on
week.
the agenda.
All right. Anything else? Okay. I'm going to ask for a motion to return to executive session under Rhode Island General Law 42465A1, job performance, character, physical, and mental health, superintendent, evaluation, and administration, and under Rhode Island General Law 42465A2, negotiation update, Council 94.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ask for a vote. Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mr. Pavo?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo? I don't know. Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
Mrs. Palish?
Yes.
I vote yes. We're back in executive.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.